Diane's scream died in her throat as a bone snapped, her trembling fingers sending a final, desperate text. "Mom, he broke my arm. Help me." She didn't realize the number was wrong. She didn't know she'd just messaged a ghost. Across an ocean, Kang Jun-hyuk was performing his nightly ritual, charging a phone that hadn't received a message in 1,826 days. The glittery pink case was cracked. The screen perpetually dark. It belonged to his sister Hannah, dead 5 years now, killed by the man she loved while her brother arrived 10 minutes too late. At 11:47 p.m., the exact minute her heart stopped, the phone vibrated. Jun-hyuk's whiskey glass shattered on marble. His hands, steady through countless acts of violence, trembled as he read the impossible words glowing on a dead woman's screen. Someone was dying. And this time, he wouldn't be late. Someone reading this right now is in Diane's bathroom, holding a broken phone, wondering if anyone will come. Don't let this story disappear into the algorithm. Subscribe and drop your location below. Let survivors know they're not alone, no matter where they are. The bathroom tile was freezing, but Diane couldn't feel it anymore. Pain had a way of swallowing everything else. The cold, the fear, even time itself. Her right arm hung at an obscene angle, bone pressing against skin in a way that made her vision swim. She pressed her back against the tub, making herself small, making herself invisible. If she could just disappear into the porcelain, maybe he'd forget she existed. Her left hand fumbled for her phone. The screen was already fractured. She couldn't remember which beating had done it. Through blurred vision and shaking fingers, she found what she thought was her mother's contact. The words came in desperate bursts. "Mom, he broke my arm. Help me." She hit send and squeezed her eyes shut, listening to Marcus's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Waiting for the door to splinter. Waiting for it to finally be over. 28 minutes later, her apartment door didn't splinter. It exploded inward. Diane heard shouting in a language she didn't recognize. Korean. Maybe. Men's voices, sharp and efficient. Marcus's screaming turned to choking, then silence. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The bathroom door opened, and hands, gentle, impossibly gentle, lifted her from the floor. She was carried through her own apartment like a broken bird. The living room was destroyed. Marcus was on his knees, blood streaming from his nose, held down by two men in dark suits. He was still trying to reach for her, even restrained, still claiming ownership. Then she saw him. The man in the center of the chaos stood perfectly still, an island of calm in the violence. Expensive suit. Cold eyes. A face carved from stone. He was looking at her the way someone might look at a ghost, horrified, reverent, haunted. Jun-hyuk's breath caught in his chest. This woman looked nothing like Hannah. Her skin was darker, her features completely different. But her eyes, God, her eyes held that same bottomless terror, that same plea for salvation that had been frozen in his sister's face when he found her body. He'd been too late then. Not tonight. "Get her to the car," he said quietly, his voice like gravel. "And make sure he never walks again." Diane's consciousness flickered as she was carried into the night, unsure if she'd just been saved or claimed by something far more dangerous than her husband ever was. Diane woke to the smell of antiseptic and silk sheets that cost more than her monthly rent. The ceiling above her was vaulted, modern, impossible. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a city she didn't recognize glittering in the pre-dawn darkness. Her arm was in a pristine white cast, the pain reduced to a dull, medicated throb. A private doctor, silver-haired, expressionless, checked her vitals without meeting her eyes. He adjusted her made notes on a tablet, and left without a word. The door closed with a whisper of expensive hinges. She was alone in luxury that felt like a tomb. Diane tried to sit up, her body screaming in protest. Every breath reminded her of Marcus's fists, his boot in her ribs, the sound of her own bone breaking. But she was alive. She was clean. Someone had changed her into soft pajamas that weren't hers. The questions crashed in. Where was she? Who were those men? What had they done to Marcus? And the terrifying one underneath all the others. Had she escaped one cage only to wake up in another? The door opened. He entered like winter itself, silent, inevitable, cold. The man from her apartment. He sat in the chair across from her bed, elbows on his knees, hands folded. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something ancient and wounded. The silence stretched until Diane couldn't bear it. "Who are you?" His voice, when it came, was quiet and devastatingly precise. "You sent a message to my sister's phone. She's been dead for 5 years." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze pinning her in place. "Tell me why I should believe this was an accident." Diane's heart hammered against her broken ribs. She had no idea what he was talking about. She had no idea if she'd survive telling him the truth. I was texting my mother." Something flickered across his face. Belief, or maybe something more dangerous. Recognition. Over the next 3 days, June Hyuk came to her room at odd hours. Dawn, midnight, the grey space between afternoon and evening. He never stayed long. Their conversations were fragments, puzzle pieces that Diane slowly assembled into a portrait of grief so heavy it had its own gravity. Hannah had been 23. An art student with a smile that could disarm anyone, even her brother. She'd fallen in love with a charming man who turned cruel behind closed doors. By the time she realized she was trapped, isolation had already wrapped around her throat like a noose. "She called me," June Hyuk said one night, staring at the city lights. 11:37 p.m. "I was across town, handling business I thought was more important." His jaw tightened. "I got there at 11:57. 20 minutes. That's all it would have taken." Diane's chest ached. She understood that mathematics of too late, how seconds could be the difference between survival and erasure. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. His eyes cut to hers, sharp and unyielding. "Wasn't it?" On the 4th day, he brought the phone. It looked absurd in his hands, that glittery pink case scratched and faded, a relic from another life. He set it on the table between them like an offering, or maybe a confession. "I keep it charged. Every night at 11:47, the minute she died, I plug it in." His voice was stripped bare, no armor left. "I keep her number active. Read her old messages. Text her things I should have said when she could still read them." Diane stared at the phone, understanding blooming like a bruise. "I keep it alive because I couldn't keep her alive." June Hyuk's hands curled into fists. "For 5 years, that phone has been silent. A grave I tend. And then you," his voice cracked, just slightly. "You appeared." The weight of it crushed the air from the room. Diane wasn't random. Wasn't lucky. She was an answered prayer from a dead woman's phone. A second chance for a man who'd been drowning in 5 years of Obese. "I'm not her," Diane said softly, tears burning her eyes. "I know." June Hyuk met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the human underneath the ice. "But maybe you're the reason I kept that phone alive all this time. Maybe she sent you to me." Or maybe, Diane thought, fate was just cruel enough to bind 2 broken people together through a wrong number and a ghost who refused to stay silent. 6 weeks after the rescue, Diane's cast came off. Her arm was weak, the bone still tender, but it was hers again. Whole. Healing. June Hyuk's penthouse had become less of a prison and more of a cocoon. Safe, sterile, suffocating. She needed air. She needed to remember who she'd been before Marcus turned her into something small and scared. The bodyguards followed at a distance as she explored the neighborhood. Korean bakeries with steamed buns in the window. Street vendors selling tteokbokki that made her mouth water. And then, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore, she found it, SEOM Community Center. The smell hit her first. Acrylic paint, clay, possibility. Through the window, she watched children laughing over canvases, an elderly woman sculpting with gnarled, confident hands. Something in Diane's chest cracked open, letting in light for the first time in years. She'd been an art therapist once. Before Marcus convinced her she was worthless. Before she forgot she had hands that could create instead of just shield. When she told June Hyuk that evening, he made a single phone call. 3 days later, she had a position at SAOM. No interview. No questions. Just an opportunity that appeared like magic. Her first day back, Diane stood before a blank canvas, brush trembling in her grip. The children watched, curious. She dipped into crimson, then gold, then deep ocean blue. Her hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the brush. But then color bloomed across white. A sunrise. A wound becoming a scar. Beauty born from breaking. Tears streamed down her face as she painted, and she didn't bother wiping them away. From the doorway, unseen, June Hyuk watched. He'd come to check on security, to ensure she was protected. But what he saw stopped him cold. This woman who'd arrived broken in his arms, now creating light from darkness with hands that were learning not to fear their own power. Something shifted in his chest. Something dangerous that had nothing to do with redemption and everything to do with her. 2 months in, and Diane could feel the invisible leash tightening. The bodyguards. The penthouse. The job that appeared without her earning it. The way June Hyuk tracked her movements with eyes that were equal parts protective and possessive. She was grateful. God, she was so grateful. But gratitude was starting to feel like another kind of cage. She found him in his office one evening, city lights painting his face in shadow and gold. "We need to talk." He looked up, already guarded. "What's wrong?" "You saved me." The words came steady, rehearsed. "Thank you. I mean that. But I'm not your second chance. I'm not Hannah." She stepped closer, forcing him to see her, really see her. "I need my own space. My own life. I can't breathe in this borrowed existence." June Hyuk's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to keep her close, to protect her from a world that had already tried to destroy her once. Control was safety. Control meant she'd never end up like his sister. But the look in Diane's eyes, determined, terrified, free, stopped him. "You don't understand what's out there," he said quietly, a last defense. "I understand better than you think." Her voice didn't waver. "And I need to face it on my own terms. Or I'll never really be free." The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then June Hyuk exhaled, something in him surrendering. "You're right." The admission cost him. "You're not Hannah." He stood, closing the distance between them. "You're stronger than she ever got the chance to be." The words landed like a blessing and a goodbye. "I'll help you find a place. Your own apartment. Your own rules." His hand hovered near hers, not touching. "But the security stays. Non-negotiable." Diane smiled, sad, grateful, victorious. "I can live with that." As she left his office, June Hyuk realized something terrifying. He wasn't protecting her anymore. He was falling for her. The apartment was small, a studio with exposed brick and a kitchen barely big enough for one. But it was hers. The lease had her name on it. The keys fit her hand like a promise she was finally allowed to keep. June Hyuk had helped with the deposit but refused to let her sign anything that made her beholden. "Independence means ownership," he'd said. "Not obligation." She painted the walls cream. Hung thrift art. Built a life from scratch. And somehow, he was still there, woven into the edges of her new world. Thursday dinners at the noodle shop down the street. Saturday morning coffee that stretched into afternoon conversations. Moments that felt less like obligation and more like choice. He was different outside the penthouse. Softer. He laughed at her terrible jokes, listened to her talk about the kids at the center, asked questions about her life before Marcus as if she'd been a person worth knowing all along. One evening, sitting on her tiny balcony with cheap wine and city noise below, June Hyuk went quiet. The silence felt heavy, loaded. "I thought saving you would quiet the guilt," he said finally, staring at the skyline. "That it would fix something broken in me." He turned to face her, his expression stripped of all its usual armor. "But it didn't. Because this isn't about redemption anymore." Diane's breath caught. "It's about you." His voice was rough, honest, terrifying. "The way you rebuilt yourself. The way you create beauty from wreckage. The way you—" He stopped, struggling. "I don't know when protection became something else. But it did." Diane's heart hammered against her ribs. She could retreat. She could keep herself safe behind walls she'd only just learned to build. Instead, she reached across the small space between them and took his hand. "I know," she whispered. And in that moment, two people who'd survived the worst of love decided, carefully, deliberately, to risk it again. Diane returned to the penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon to drop off a book June Hyuk had lent her, a collection of Korean poetry she devoured in 3 nights. He wasn't home. The space felt cavernous without him, every corner echoing with expensive emptiness. She set the book on his desk and turned to leave. That's when she noticed it, a door at the end of the hallway she'd never seen open. Today, it stood slightly ajar, light bleeding through the crack like a secret escaping. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her hand pushed the door open anyway. The room was small, barely larger than a closet. But every surface was covered in henna. Photographs lined the walls, a young woman with her brother's eyes, laughing at a birthday party, graduation gown billowing, paint streaked across her cheek. In the center, on a small table draped in white cloth, sat the glittery pink phone on its charging stand. A shrine. A penance. A grave Junhyuk had been tending for 5 years. Diane's throat tightened. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. The messages were all unsent drafts, words written but never delivered to the void. I'm sorry I was late. I should have made you leave him. I miss you every day. I don't know how to stop failing you. Tears blurred Diane's vision as she scrolled through years of grief, each message a prayer to someone who couldn't answer. This was the cost of her rescue, a man so consumed by guilt that he'd built his entire life around a ghost. Diane found paper and pen on the desk. Her hand moved almost without thought. She knows. And she forgives you. Let her go. She placed the note beside the phone, her own tears falling onto the white cloth. Some debts, she realized, could only be paid by choosing to live again. Marcus had been held in a place without windows for 4 months. Junhyuk's people were efficient. He was fed, his injuries treated, his existence reduced to a concrete room and the certainty that he'd never touch Diane again. But monsters are patient. And men like Marcus are very good at finding cracks in cages. He escaped on a Thursday. Bribed a guard whose daughter needed surgery. By Friday evening, he was standing outside him community center, watching through the window as his wife, laughed with children, her hands covered in paint, her face radiant with something he'd spent years trying to destroy. Freedom. Diane was cleaning brushes when the door opened. She didn't look up immediately. Parents often arrived late for pickup. But the air changed. Went cold. Her body recognized the threat before her mind did. She turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, thinner but still solid, his eyes holding that familiar cocktail of rage and possession that used to make her disappear into herself. The children went quiet, sensing danger the way prey animals sense wolves. You think you can just leave me? His voice was conversational, almost gentle. That's how it always started. Run off with some rich Korean bastard and play house? You think you're better than me now? He took a step forward. Diane's heart slammed against her ribs, but her feet didn't move. Something had changed in her, something fundamental. She'd been broken and remade. She'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living. Get out. Her voice didn't shake. Marcus smiled, that terrible, familiar smile that used to precede violence. You're still mine, Diane. You'll always be mine. He reached for her. And this time, Diane didn't run. Marcus's hand closed around Diane's wrist, the same grip that had dragged her across floors, pinned her against walls, turned her body into a catalogue of bruises. But Diane had spent 4 months learning a different language. One taught by a man who understood that protection meant giving someone the tools to save themselves. She twisted her arm exactly the way Junhyuk had shown her, breaking Marcus's grip with a sharp, efficient movement. His surprise gave her the heartbeat she needed. She drove her palm upward into his nose, not hard enough to kill, but hard enough to make him stagger back, blood exploding across his face. You bitch. He lunged. Diane sidestepped, using his momentum against him the way she'd practiced 100 times in Junhyuk's private gym. Marcus crashed into a table, paint supplies scattering. The children screamed. Someone was calling 911. He came at her again, rage making him sloppy. Diane blocked his swing, drove her knee into his stomach, and when he doubled over, she brought her elbow down on the back of his neck. He crumpled. She stood over him, chest heaving, hand shaking, alive in a way she'd never been when she was his. Marcus groaned, trying to rise. You're nothing without me. Nothing. No. Diane's voice cut through his delusion like a blade. I was nothing with you. Security burst through the door, followed seconds later by police. They hauled Marcus to his feet, his face a mess of blood and shock. He was still trying to reach for her, still trying to claim ownership even as handcuffs bit into his wrists. As they dragged him toward the door, Diane stepped forward, made sure he could see her face, unmarked, unafraid, free. I was never yours, she said quietly, each word a nail in a coffin she'd been building for months. And I'm never anyone's again unless I choose to be. Marcus's eyes widened with the terrible realization that he'd lost. Not just her body, but the fear that had kept her chained. The door closed behind him. The monster was gone. Diane sank into a chair, adrenaline draining from her limbs like water. Her phone buzzed. June Hyuk, already on his way, alerted by security. But she'd handled it. She'd saved herself. For the first time in years, Diane smiled through her tears. She was finally, truly free. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, Diane met June Hyuk in a small park overlooking the Han River. Cherry blossoms drifted through the air like snow, settling on benches and shoulders and the surface of the water. It was the kind of beauty that felt earned, soft and transient and precious because it couldn't last. June Hyuk looked different. Tired, maybe. Or lighter. She couldn't quite place it. "You didn't have to come," she said, sitting beside him. "I wanted to." He watched the river, hands folded between his knees. "I've been thinking about what you said. About independence. About not being anyone's second chance." Diane waited, her heart a steady drum. "I'm dismantling parts of the empire," he continued quietly. "The illegal operations. The violence. It's going to take years, but I'm trying to build something better. Something Hannah would have been proud of." He turned to face her, and his eyes held a vulnerability that still surprised her. "I want you to be part of it. Not as someone I protect. As my partner." "What kind of partnership?" "The art center." His voice gained strength. "We expand it. Turn it into a full shelter for survivors of domestic violence. Art therapy, legal aid, housing assistance. You'd run the programs. I'd provide the resources. Equal say. Equal control." He paused. "Not a rescue. A choice." Diane's throat tightened. This was everything she dreamed of when she was still an art therapist with hope in her chest, before Marcus convinced her that dreams were luxuries for people who mattered. "Yes," she said. Then, before doubt could creep in, "But I have one condition." "Anything." "You stop charging that phone." June Hyuk went still. The cherry blossoms fell around them like witnesses to something sacred and painful. "She's gone," Diane said gently. "And she'd want you to live. Really live. Not just survive in the shadow of guilt." His jaw worked. 5 years of ritual, of penance, of keeping his sister alive through a phone that had become a gravestone. Letting go felt like killing her all over again. But maybe, he realized, holding on had been the real betrayal. Hannah had loved life, art and laughter and possibility. She wouldn't have wanted this frozen grief, this half-existence. "Okay," he whispered. That night, at 11:47 p.m., June Hyuk stood in Hannah's shrine for the last time. He unplugged the phone, watching the battery icon fade. The screen went dark. He placed it carefully in a wooden box alongside her photographs, letters she'd written him as a child, a dried flower from her graduation. "Thank you for sending her to me," he said to the silence, to the sister who'd been gone for 5 years but had somehow orchestrated a miracle through a wrong number and a ghost who refused to let him drown. He closed the box, turned off the light, walked away. And for the first time since the night he arrived 10 minutes too late, Kang Jun-hyuk lay down and slept without ghosts, only dreams of cherry blossoms and a woman who'd taught him that redemption wasn't about saving someone else. It was about learning to save yourself.